The relatively new Warner's Animation Group is now 5 movies in, and I'd say has settled nicely into the top half of major animated studios. Its first 2 Lego movies are highly acclaimed for being unique within the Hollywood box of CGI family-oriented product placement, for having great comedy and interesting stories. Ninjago significantly less so, but still funny and better than most. And even their more conventionally looking CGI film Stork stood out for its very exaggerated animated humor, to the point where it made Hotel Transylvania and Cloudy look somewhat subdued. Their newest animated film, Smallfoot, out of everything they've done so far, is easily the least funny. Not because its jokes fail at a higher ratio, though not necessarily not that, but because this film's main focus is on its story and its message. And I'll say this just once and never again, probably. Everything here has technically been done before, but slightly less often than most, and while there are no major surprises, it does have subtle twists on tropes that make things a little bit more interesting. But for what this film is trying to do, it is doing it pretty well. And while not to the point that Incredibles 2 has much to worry about, I was pretty impressed with this. But before we get to that, let's get the technicals out of the way. Visually speaking, it's solid. Natural details like rocks, trees, and snow look realistic but appealing, while the characters are fairly rubbery and expressive. The bits of physical comedy it does have, some is good, some is just passable. It's almost more important that none of it is bad. But stepping up from Storks, this film also has some genuinely beautiful looking moments. And I don't know who came up with the fuzzy glow-in-the-dark snails as a light source, but give that person a raise! The core character designs are decently varied, but I could not tell you at the end what any of these characters' names were. But that's mostly because this film follows a larger number of major characters than most animated films that still largely all look very similar. The only name I remember is Brenda, and it's only because James Corden's character says it like 500 times in this film. At this point, I mostly identify each character by their narrative role and only occasionally by the famous people playing them, because a too common occurrence in animated celebrity casting is picking celebrities that are big names that have very vanilla sounding voices. As a result, every voice here sounds like a normal everyday person and not a distinct character, though Channing Tatum did do some impressive voice acting in this. But thankfully, this film's main appeal isn't dependent on any individual character's magnetism, it's the story. Speaking of which, what's the deal with that plot? Well, the premise of Smallfoot is that it's about a community of incredibly devout Yetis that every day follow the teachings and traditions as written by the Stones. One day, protagonist Yeti sees a human, or Smallfoot, but the Stones say there is no such thing as a Smallfoot, so is he wrong, or are the Stones wrong? And if the Stones are wrong, the Yeti village will surely burst into flames or something. Yep. That's exactly what's happening, and yes, it can be perceived that there are some mild religious metaphors here. However, this film's real aim is a bit more broader. It's not about the condemnation of old ideas or traditions, only when they prohibit any new ideas or new information. Then halfway through the film, there is another significant development that evolves the conflict even further with another, even more recently relevant theme. I'll just say that it turns out this film surprisingly has more in common with Sausage Party than I initially thought it would, obviously without the rated R content. Let's just say it's something about truth. And I gotta say that overall, granted within the boundaries of a mid-budgeted mainstream studio family film, I'd say that this film handled its story and theme excellently. And a major part of that was making sure that you sympathized, or at least understood, every character's perspective. So another case where a much better movie was made to look a lot sillier than it was to advertise to parents. Which I guess is technically better than spoilers. I will say that there's this one point where the comic relief, you know the type, the one that stands out because he's loud, kind of a jerk, and quotes from the Urban Dictionary to connect to the young people. At one point, he's completely left behind, and everyone goes, yeah, f that guy. If that was intended to be a slight against that character type as a whole, that is the funniest joke in the whole movie. I was initially worried about James Corden's character in terms of how dumb and cynical he would be, but once we got past his first 5 minutes or so, he was great for the rest of the film. He and protagonist Yeti have some really great, funny, and sincere interactions, and there's a particular amusing confrontation involving a cave and a bear. Now, while this might be delving into this film's intentions more than necessary, I did initially find it a little bit ironic how a story about truth was conceptually tied to one of our most prevailing conspiracy theories. Because the status quo is a lie, man. The authorities are hiding things from us, man. I think it could have been interesting if they had time to take shots at those sorts of people. You know, the people that always say they're about finding the truth, but are really just attention-seeking anti-conformists that are even more opposed to evidence that goes against their beliefs than most religions. Not that they needed to, they had enough going on here, and it is a good thing to always at least be open to the idea that things you thought were true might not be. It just would have been a nice change of pace, because conspiracy theories are another in that long list of things that Hollywood loves to make look way more fun than they are in real life. Like car crashes, and shootouts, and abusive romantic interests. Yeah, I know that's their entire job, but at least occasionally in a Hollywood car crash somebody dies. But credit to this film's presentation, because it would be wrong to associate these guys with real conspiracy theorists, because these guys give a crap about proof. There also could have potentially been more in the text to emphasize why the truth, when often complicated and frustrating, was still inherently better to the alternative, but I think it was implied by the main Yeti's family tradition being proven to not just be useless, but painful, and most likely crippled and killed his entire family. Oh yeah, and it's also a musical, making it the first in a while, probably since Yeesh the Lorax, that a non-Disney studio has even tried. You don't count, all but one of your songs were covers! And oh right, you technically count. And keep in mind that no matter what I say, I am glad that they attempted it. I really wish there were more theatrical original musicals that don't romanticize historically famous liars and extortionists. And as a musical, Smallfoot is sufficient. You have your introductory status quo establishing "There goes the baker with his tray like always" song, your very pretty Let It Go stand-in song by a Disney Channel star that is literally the kind of song that Teen Titans Go just parodied.
It's an upbeat, inspirational song about life.
Not that that's a bad thing, it is one of the standouts. The lyrics are just kind of generic. Then James Corden sings an alternative lyric version of Under Pressure, because Ice Ice Baby would have been too obvious, which, while not excruciating, is easily the weakest part of this whole film. But easily my favorite is Common's Let It Lie. Heh. I see what you did there. Which is technically not a villain song, but visually and tonally, this is straight up Be Prepared, Unfortunate Soul classic Disney villain song territory. It is great. So yeah, it's really not bad at all, but they are the kind of songs where everyone sings in very airy, poppy voices. Basically, nobody here is projecting from the diaphragm, is what I'm saying. But you know what the biggest surprise was? For a musical, there was no ending dance number, which is so great because the ending was so uplifting and satisfying, and a dance number would have ruined it. In conclusion, where there are still some trappings of routine studio animated mediocrity, and nothing here is particularly extraordinary, I did thoroughly enjoy this. Its caliber is of a certain quality above a lot of others, and I greatly respect it. Certainly enough to be insulted that it was beaten at the box office by Night School. Because it's evident most of you have not watched my highlights of summer video, I will reiterate that out of the multiple great animated series we've gotten in the past 4 months, the one I would recommend the highest is Hilda, a fantastic urban fantasy series that, while tangentially related to Gravity Falls, is slightly lower in the realms of sarcasm and nightmare fuel, but is significantly higher in the realms of whimsy, world building, fantasy creatures as inclusive ongoing characters, and feels. Also BoJack, also Venture Brothers, also DuckTales, also Dragon Prince, also lots of stuff. But for our, at this point, obligatory European or anime film that no one's ever heard of, on Netflix you can watch Phantom Boy, which is great. A boy in the hospital gains the ability to project himself from his body and uses it to help a wounded police officer stop a supervillain. Characters could be more expressive, but it is a solid piece of work. So what did you guys think of Smallfoot? Comment, like, subscribe, etc., and you stay incredibly shiny, Animaniacs!
And new rules apply. So it's best just to let it lie.